boss, is what I have to say.
Yes.
Welcome. Welcome, everybody. It is Thursday, February 12th. And we are because it's Thursday, we're focusing on labor. And we're going to begin with some bill introductions from our members, from our other senators. And today we welcome my colleague from the Windsor District, Joe Major. And Joe, if you'd be kind enough to introduce yourself and introduce this bill, that would be great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Joe Major, as the chair said, Senator from Windsor. Thank you for the opportunity to present an overview of S360. Dyslexic 306. This legislation recognizes the critical role that public safety dispatchers and emergency communication professionals play in Vermont's emergency response system and provides them with the appropriate recognition, training, support, and workers' compensation protections for post-traumatic stress disorder. Purpose of the bill, S306 formally defines public safety dispatchers and emergency communication personnel as first responders in communications. These professionals serve as the first point of contact during emergencies. They assess situations, provide life-saving instruction, coordinate police, fire, and EMS resources, and manage multiple high-risk incidents simultaneously. The purpose of this act is to recognize the essential and often traumatic nature of this work and provide access to benefits more traditionally associated with other first responders, including training opportunities and mental health support. Key provisions. First, the bill establishes a new chapter in Title 20 defining first responder in communications. The definition includes individuals certified by the Vermont Enhanced 9/11 Board or employed as emergency communication dispatchers responsible for life-saving communication services. The bill also directs employers to provide training that maintains and enhances the knowledge, skill, and proficiency of these professionals. Second, S306 amends Vermont's workers' compensation statute to include first responders in communications alongside police officers, firefighters, EMS personnel, and certain state employees. The bill creates a presumption that a PTSD diagnosis by a mental health professional was incurred in the line of duty, unless evidence shows the condition was caused by a non-service related factors. Eligibility for benefits extend to individuals diagnosed within 3 years of their last active employment. Workforce and economic content. Emergency communication centers across Vermont face ongoing workforce challenges, including recruitment difficulties, high stress, and turnover. The nature of the work exposes dispatchers to repeated traumatic events without the closure that field responders sometimes experience. Recognizing these professionals as first responders and ensuring access to appropriate supports is an important step towards improving retention, strengthening the workforce, and maintaining reliable emergency services statewide. From an economic and community development perspective, effective emergency communications are foundational to public safety, community stability, and business confidence. Strong and well-supported dispatch systems are essential infrastructure for both residential and employers. Residents and employers. Finally, S306 provides long overdue recognition for the professionals who answer every emergency call and coordinate the response that follows. By acknowledging their role as first responders and ensuring access to training and PTSD protections, this bill strengthens Vermont's public safety system and supports the workforce behind it. I thank you for your consideration.
So, thank you for introducing this. You have a sort of companion bill.
Yes, it is.
David has a question.
If I could, so every bill has a story.
Sure.
Every bill has a genesis.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, who brought this for you? Who made this, who made you aware? And what type of support are you already aware of behind the concept?
So who made me aware of it was, the chief of police from Hartford. She brought it to me, and, full disclosure, I was unaware because I knew that, on the state level, their, dispatchers were covered during this, and just local municipalities weren't. And so, it was a blind spot for me as well. And once I found that out, I thought it was, good to cover all dispatchers.
Thank you.
You have a notion of how many that is across the state?
I do not. But I can get that,
Okay.
information for you. And also something, I'll give you for instance, take Hartford, for instance. It is across the state as well. They cover both New Hampshire and Lebanon as well as, so I would suspect that there is some other state,
Well, we'll find out if
Yeah.
New Hampshire covers.
yeah,
So, thank you Lorraine, for that. So before Sophie, because it's a silly back and
Yeah,
forth at the
yeah.
moment, why don't I also have you introduce 307 and then
Sure.
you can get to committee and we can bring Sophie in.
that would be spectacular. I appreciate that. Thanks for the opportunity to present the overview of S307, the Fire Service Weekly Overtime Standards Act. This bill addresses a long-standing issue in the fire service, the gap between the demanding schedules of our career firefighters' work and overtime protections afforded to many other workers and public safety professionals. The core goal of S307 is straightforward: to establish a reasonable maximum average work week for career firefighters and to require overtime compensation for hours worked beyond the threshold. That threshold bill sets that standard at 42 hours per week on average, with overtime paid at time and a half for hours exceeding that level. Firefighters work extended shifts under physically and mentally demanding conditions. Long hours and accumulated fatigue can affect health, family stability, job performance, and operational safety. By establishing a clear overtime standard, the legislation is intended to promote firefighters' health and wellness, reduce fatigue-related risk during emergency response, improve recruitment and retention in a field facing workforce challenges, and align compensation practices more closely with expectations placed on these professionals. Key provisions in the bill. S307 would add a new section to Vermont's labor law specific to full-time firefighters. 1, 42-hour average work week standard. State, municipal, and county fire departments must pay overtime at 1.5 times the regular rate for hours worked beyond the average of 42 hours per week. 2, 8-week average method. The average work week is calculated over a period prior to eight weeks, providing flexibility for departments and use of rotating extended shift schedules. 3, compensation definition of hours worked. Hours worked include all duty time as well as paid leave, paid time off, and paid standby time, ensuring consistency and clarity. 4, local flexibility preserved. The bill explicitly allows municipalities, fire districts, and bargaining units to negotiate more protective standards through collective bargaining with local policy. 5, implementation timeline. Effective July 1st, 2026. Departments must make necessary staffing or scheduling adjustments by January of 2027. And 6, rulemaking authority. The Commissioner of Labor may adopt rules to ensure uniform calculation and reporting. The impact considerations. This proposal recognizes that departments operate under varying staffing models and fiscal restraints. The 8-week averaging period and delayed implementation are intended to provide operational flexibility and planning timeline. The bill does not mandate a specific schedule model. Instead, it creates a compensation framework that allows communities to choose the approach that works best, whether through scheduling changes, staffing adjustments, or negotiated agreements. Across Vermont, fire departments, like many public safety agencies, are facing recruitment and retention challenges. Compensation predictability and fairness are critical factors in attracting and keeping experienced personnel. At the same time, ensuring firefighters are not consistently working excessive hours without appropriate compensation supports both public safety and workforce stability. S307 represents a measured step to modernize overtime policy for career firefighters while maintaining local control and flexibility. Finally, S307 establishes a reasonable overtime standard, supports firefighters' health and operational safety, and provides municipalities with time and flexibility to adapt. I look forward to the committee's discussion and to hearing from municipality leaders, fire service professionals, and labor representatives and other stakeholders as you evaluate the bill's fiscal and operational impacts.
Thank you, Joseph. Are you going to ask your story question on this one too? I think
a
it's great.
radio broadcaster. Like,
Yeah.
we should have you report everything.
I was just curious, so, shift work. My understanding, firefighter friends, professionals, full-time, they work in 24-hour shifts. So 24-hour shifts already exceeds the overtime limit. So two days a week, 24-hour shifts in a week would already violate the premise of the bill. That's the intent, right? That we're recognizing the 24-hour shift as 24 working hours.
So I'm going to defer to just like I defer to the person who brought me the reason of this. I'm going to defer to the person next to me who brought me the bill and to answer that question.
Chris, you identify yourself. We have 5 more minutes,
Yeah.
so we've got to Sophie go through them.
So Chris Newby, President of Professional Firefighters of Vermont. So my background is I had 33 years with the Hartford Vermont Fire Department. So there's 56 hours, 40-hour work weeks are the most common in fire service. There are some federal ones that work, it's like a 72-hour work week. So basically day on, day off, day on. You might get what they call a Kelly day in there. So the way that this works, it does it over an 8-week cycle. So you could work 2 days 1 week, or maybe one the next. But in an 8-week cycle, it averages out to 42 hours worth. The same with the 56-hour work. They may in a week put in 3 24-hour shifts, say. But over an 8-week cycle, it averages out to 56 hours. That's basically how it works. I know it's just confusing, but it's based on hours work and the rotation of, like, when you start on a Sunday and 8 weeks you're back to that Sunday you started on. And in that time frame, you can take all it and average out, and it comes out to 56 hours.
And I recommend that if the chair continues with this bill, kind of lay that out.
Yep.
Like give us a diagram of,
Chart, it would be
yeah.
great.
you know, whatever the 8-week cycle is, and then the normal, or at least
Yeah.
Hartford, how that would.
On an
how
Excel
it-
spreadsheet.
yeah, how it looks,
Or just
and
a
then,
diagram.
and then how it bumps into this bill.
Sure.
What would potentially get them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, there's many different schedules, whether it's 2 days on, like we work a day on, 2 days off, a day on, 4 days off, or 42. Some do a day on, 3 days off, day on, 3 days off. When I first got hired, we did 42, but it was 2 10-hour days, 2 14-hour nights, and then 4 days off. But it all averaged out to 42 hours.
Great.
And I'm happy to do that.
I'm going to keep us on task here and on time. Thank you, Joe.
Okay.
We are very grateful, and we're going to invite Sophie to come up and just quickly run through these 2 bills. And then we're going to turn to S292.
Thank you.
Joe, thank you.
All right.
Good morning, Sophie Zadatni from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Do I have permission to share my screen? Is that okay? If I go ahead and share?
Yeah, and not in depth, Sophie, because we have 3 or 4 minutes. We're gonna try and do these bill
Okay,
introductions.
well, I will say, I thought Senator Major did an excellent job.
Yeah, we really did.
He pretty much,
pretty
much
much
go
Effective
Yeah.
date, like, we're good.
so, oh, I got the wrong thing. Okay, well, you have the bills in front of you, correct? So maybe I'll just.
We have it in front of us, folks.
Okay. So again, this would create a new chapter in Title 20, specifically to cover.
306.
This is for 306, right, that, yes, 306.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's already being discussed, but this would, essentially, there are different definitions throughout the statutes around, first responders. I mean, they're called different things. This would really create, a specific definition, as stated. And so that would be the definition that's on page 2, what would be a new section 2461. And again, it's a lengthy definition, but the goal is to kind of capture all the current definitions that are out there in the statute. The training, it provides that to the extent practicable, employers for first responder and communication shall provide training to maintain and enhance the knowledge, skills, and proficiency of the first responder in communications. So there is nothing specific right now. There are different funds that are out there. There's an emergency medical services special fund. I think this would enable first responders and communications to tap into some of the training funds that are out there currently. For first responders, I don't know that for a fact, but there are different funds out there. So if there's a question on where the funding would come for training, I think it would just enable first responders with communications to tap into some of the existing funding. And then under the workers' compensation piece, again, I thought Senator Major did an excellent job. The General Assembly in recent years has added in this presumption of if you're diagnosed with PTSD, that it's assumed to be within the line of duty for certain positions, if it occurs within 3 years. And so this would simply add first responders and communications to that. And this was a recommendation that came out of, there's an emergency service provider wellness commission that was created in 2021. And they have a list of recommendations. And this specifically was one of the recommendations, was to provide PTSD coverage through workers' compensation for dispatchers, first responders and communication. So that's really the sum of it. I think Senator Major hit all the key points.
You did a terrific job.
There is just, I know often there's a question in terms of what other folks are doing. There is a federal bill. I don't know whether it's going to go anywhere. It passed the Senate, called Enhancing First Responder Act, that would direct the Federal Communications Commission to issue reports. So again, that has some elements of protection in there, but again, I don't know if that's going to move. And then there are a number of other states that have done the same thing, including in New Hampshire, as one of our local ones. So,
Right. And 307, just briefly.
so 307, again, as discussed, was to do with creating a 42-hour-a-week threshold for overtime. And again, this would be flexible, as Senator Major reflected. I would say to Senator Weeks's point, I mean, if you dig in, there's just multitudes of all the way these different schedules work. So again, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, there are examples of how the scheduling can work, and it's incredibly complicated. So I do think that would be a subject to have separate testimony on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, this is a push. I will say there's a national push on this right now. So we're not, again, Vermont's not alone. Rhode Island, I know, has passed something similar, but there is an effort to, provide more regularity and for firefighters. And again, it's over a cycle. Currently under the FLSA, again, there are rules called the tour of duty rules, again, to try and manage the time. And again, this flexibility of looking back over time to make sure you're not, 42 hours a week, but it's averaged out over 8 weeks. So,
Right. Thank you. Any question? Okay.
Again, just kind of in preparation if Madam Chair decides to take this bill
Well,
on.
we.
As a, from a military perspective, where we wouldn't go out for 24 hours, we would be on shift for 6 months. I would like to see like cost analysis, time utilized, be really a compelling case to just carry this forward. Just as a heads up, so we don't just come in and talk about the same stuff. We really want to see some quantified data about it.
JFOs along with VLCT is top of my list of witnesses. And then I'm going to ask Chris, who's here today, to please, if you could be kind enough to email Kiara and myself, the witness, a couple of witnesses that you would want to include on this, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sophie. We're going to pivot now to S292. Which Thomas is going to introduce, and we're then going to hear from Sophie. And so Sophie, you can sit right there, and a few other witnesses. So Thomas, it's yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 292 is a bill that would lift prohibition against Vermont state colleges and the UVM employees from withholding their labor in times of collective bargaining. That they would allow them to strike. Now, I don't think that the advocates for this want to strike. I don't think labor organizations want to strike at all. The impetus for this bill, to Senator Weeks' previous points on the last two, was in the most recent contract negotiations with the staff at the University of Vermont. There were many concerns raised, and full acknowledgement, I am a longtime faculty and staff member at UVM. So the union's been there for me whenever I've needed. I'm so a strong proponent of United Academics, and I know a lot of friends that were involved in this staff negotiation. So there was many concerns that the negotiation was dragged out for a longer period of time than it necessarily should have been, which kept a lot of employees in limbo, not knowing if they were going to continue to work there, meaning if their labor was valued at the appropriate rate, and also suspended raises that were be in the active negotiation for. I want to get the numbers right, but it was almost a full year, if not longer than a year. And those were those that make that amount of money. Those are real dollars that they needed in order to pay their bills, pay their rent, and otherwise, especially in the Chittenden County housing market. So the arguments are that had they had the ability to strike, it would have motivated management in order to get them to the bargaining table and resolve it on a much more sooner time frame. So that's why I think it would be fair to give them the same capabilities. I would defer to Sophie, who knows this topic matter really well, as to the historical precedent for why UVM and Vermont State College employees can't strike currently. I think it has something to do with the fact that they are state funded, and other states do approach this in a variety of different ways. It's not one gold standard for this. But many of my colleagues really advocated for the right to withhold their labor in order to improve their negotiating capabilities for collective bargaining discussions.
And you just remind us, you may have said it and I just hear it, the length of the last negotiation, because it was endless.
I would really glad that we have a speaker here that can say with concrete assurance, but I don't have the specific time frame. I just know it was a year, if not longer, or somewhere around then.
Okay, great.
13 months.
Thank you. That's helpful. So,
Sorry to whisper in my ear.
All right.
and again, briefly, because we're going to hear from two people, I think. Thomas, you lined up, or one? This one.
Right. Why am I think we'll be again?
Again, we have it in front of us, Sophie,
Okay, all right.
and it's one page.
Okay, yes.
Two things.
So what you currently have in front of you, it's simply, so this is under the State Employee Labor Relations Act. Vermont had 7 Labor Relations Act. This is under the State Employee Labor Relations Act, which covers, as noted, the University of Vermont and the Vermont State College system. And so all this bill does right now is it simply removes the prohibition on strikes specifically for the institutions of public higher education. So right now, under the State Employee Labor Relations Act, there's no right to strike for any of the employees covered by that. This would just carve out an exception to that prohibition. So if the committee moves this forward, I would point out that you would need a bigger bill than this. Historically, in Vermont, we have under the teachers, the Labor Relations Act, the teachers and administrators, they have a right to strike, and also under the Municipal Employee Relations Act, there's also a right to strike. but there are other provisions in those statutes that provide that for cooling off periods, there are guardrails around the right to strike. And the teacher's situation, for example, there's the right to for management once you've gone through the process. So there's a right to strike, and then there's also the right of the school board to unilaterally impose a contract at the end of it. So with the current mechanism that we have under the State Employee Labor Relations Act is this: when you hit an impasse in negotiations, you go to mediation, then you go to non-binding, fact-binding, and then you go to what's called last best offer, either in front of the Labor Relations Board or in front of an arbitrator, and that's the impasse resolution system. And so again, you would need to put something else in this to, have some other mechanism in here. It's not just removing the right to strike. You need some mechanism on the other side to make sure that it's a fair system that pushes both parties towards resolution. So that's a very big picture. Generally speaking, there's no federal law giving public sector unions the right to strike. That's all done on a state-by-state basis. The vast majority of states do prohibit their public sector employees from striking. But there are some that, again, like in Vermont, we do allow teachers and municipal workers to strike in certain circumstances. We're the only state in New England to do that.
Really? I did
Yeah.
not appreciate it.
Yeah. And so I would just say, to the point on the sort of public policy thing, I would say there was the VLRB in a decision in 1982 was explaining why the right to strike is not covered for state employees. And they said the strike is an economic weapon of state employees. And so what the state has done is substituted these impasse procedures that I just touched on. And it said the legislature opted for a peaceful and reasoned, although oftentimes lengthy, approach to resolve bargaining disputes rather than a potentially disruptive approach. So again, there's just different philosophies, but historically, again, if you're thinking of public sector employees who are, police, firefighters, just back to what we were talking about, there are reasons why they don't have the right to strike for public safety reasons. So that's kind of the balance that you're always trying to draw
Right.
in these
Right.
situations.
So thank you, Sophie. And we're going to pivot to Sophie Bang. This is our, like, speed dating. Well, it's okay because for those of us who are new to our process, we introduce bills, we hear the substance, we understand the story behind them, and then we decide as a committee what we are willing to make time for or not, given the priorities that we're addressing already.
Great. So I hope I can flesh this out for you.
Let's just introduce ourselves because you are new to our community. It's wonderful to have you, and then we'll ask you to introduce yourself and give your testimony. Dave, if you want to start.
Dave Weeks, Rutland County.
Randy Brock, Brunswick County, and northern part of Grand Isle County.
Allison Clarkson, Midway District.
Keisha from Hinsdale, we know each other, and perhaps this is a good time. I mean, I've always been affiliated with the University of Vermont, but thanks to Senator Chittenden, I'm now adjunct faculty there and taking on more teaching in the Rubenstein School in addition to the business school. So I hope that this affects me, but
We have an adjunct, and we have a lecturer, right? Right. So, and we have an employee.
We do. Well, good morning and thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of S292. My name is Ellen Kay. I work at the University of Vermont as a full-time library cataloger. I also serve as co-president along with Claire Whitehouse of UVM Staff United, which is a local of AFT, so I can lay the groundwork here. American Federation of Teachers in Vermont, we are one of the locals, as is United Academics, another local at University of Vermont. And I also, as well as my co-president, serve as head lead negotiator in bargaining. Our union was established in 2021. We represent, and I am here on behalf of my colleagues, there are 1,500 clerical, technical, specialized, and professional staff at UVM.
Sorry, how many again?
It's about 1,500. It varies. Our union is led by members who are all full-time workers at UVM, not an outside entity. It's us. We carry out all of the work of our local, including doing our own contract bargaining and enforcement. So I'm here today in support of this bill, which would lift the prohibition, as you heard, for striking for public higher ed workers at UVM and Vermont State University. And as we've heard, under provision of the current statute, public higher ed workers are expressly prohibited from striking and work stoppages. And this means that member leaders like myself are not permitted to coordinate any strikes or work stoppages. It is my understanding, and I have been advised by legal folks, that doing so would put our union itself and our leaders at risk for things like lawsuits and termination. So to be clear, in supporting this bill, we are not expressing our desire to strike, as been said here already. No union member wants to strike. It carries risks. It requires tremendous work on part of the union and its members. And I don't know if you know this, but striking, a strike vote requires 90% yes vote. So that's a big deal. It is not a tool to be used lightly. What having the right to strike does is to level the playing field at the bargaining table. We know that when management understands that workers can withhold our labor, there is incentive for them to bargain in good faith. We're asking to lift the prohibition and extend Vermont higher ed workers the same protections and rights that other unions, especially private sector unions, have, notably K-12 workers in Vermont as well. And we wouldn't be alone. Public higher education workers in 11 other states have the right to strike. And I know from being a longtime Vermonter that Vermont doesn't always wait for everybody else to do something before we do. The possibility of a strike is essential to creating a level playing field for unionized workers. Without it, employers hold all the levels of control, and workers have very little leverage. Possibility of a strike also gives management incentive to come to a timely and prompt event. And as we talked before, just an example, I'll pass these out. In AFT local, private sector unions have bargained contracts in significantly less time than the public sector unions at UVM, SU, at UVM and Vermont State University. So these handouts show that the average length of bargaining reopening contracts, second contracts, or separate contracts in private sector unions within AFT is 3.7 months. The average length of bargaining reopener successor contracts in AFT public sector unions is 8.5 months. And I want to point out that in these settled contracts that took less time, no strikes were needed to settle those private sector contracts. The possibility of a strike alone was incentive for management to bargain in good faith in a timely manner.
Sorry, I'm on the bill, but can you just remind me, are the graduate students in UVM Staff United, or they have their own?
They're part of UAW, and they've been working very hard for a contract for more than a year.
Right, that's right.
Correct.
I
Yeah.
support them in that.
They have
They're
a
not.
union, but they're.
They're not addressed in this bill either way.
I think they would be.
They would be
Yes,
if they get a contract.
Anyone hire anyone. who
Then
works
this could
direct-
be written into their.
This would not be a part of a
Agreement.
Lisa,
contract at all.
introduce yourself.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm Lisa. I'm the political organizer for AFT Vermont.
Right. There are 5 unions at UVM. The ones that are employed directly by University of Vermont would be part of this. So this is DEXA workers, the food workers, DEXA. They're not part
So
of it.
do you know how many unions are at the Vermont State University? 7. Thank you. I've got the tech chancellor right next to me.
Thank you.
And that's very
Okay.
useful. 7. And I would remember what may be good for the goose is may not good for the gander. So, UVM, I mean, they're very different scale universities with different pocket sizes. And I hope in your thoughts about this, you've considered what this would do. Right. May not sink UVM, but it would really be a challenge for.
Well,
Vermont
again,
State.
we're not talking about a desire to strike.
Doesn't
We're talking
matter.
about leveling the playing field, and the folks at Vermont State College in those unions are supportive of this measure. Long drawn out bargaining costs time and money. In this case, taxpayer money. Last year, UVM spent $135,000 on an outside national law firm to fight its staff union, and we don't use lawyers at the table. It took 13 months to reach an agreement, 6 months at the table and in mediation, another 7 months to go through a fact-finding process requiring lawyers and a hearing. UVM employees, both management and union members, could and should have been doing the important work of serving students and Vermonters. During the course of fact-finding, we learned that UVM had budgeted more for wage increases than they had actually offered us in negotiations. And after UVM drew out the bargaining past our contract expiration date, it threatened that the contract settlement would not include retroactive pay, meaning that UVM's ability to stall would actually save them money on the backs of hardworking staff. The fact finder, however, stated in his findings, this is a neutral fact finder, a potential recommendation that a contract should be retroactive would provide a public sector employer with an unfair advantage in bargaining. Public sector employer might deliberate in bargaining, knowing the longer it took to reach an agreement, the more money could be saved because the settlement would not be retroactive. And apropos to the topic of this proposed legislation, he went on to say, on the other hand, a union without the right to strike would have very little leverage to speed up the bargaining other than to make concessions it might not otherwise have made. So in conclusion, without the ability to strike, it took 13 months and the ruling of a neutral fact finder to rein in UVM management and finally get us a contract for our members, which included retroactive pay. We need to give public higher ed workers access to all of the tools in the toolbox. This legislation would reinstate and state the rights that unions need to have an equal seat at the table. And let me spell that out for a moment. We are employees of the people who are on the other side of the table. Our union protects us. They have power over us. They can fire us. They can reorganize our workplaces. They have many, many tools. Without the tool of being able to use our right to strike or to at least have it be a possibility in the room, it is not equal negotiation. So I want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak on behalf of my colleagues and higher ed workers in Vermont.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Any questions? We have another minute for Ellen. Any questions for Ellen? Right. Thank you. And so,
Are all staff at UVM above a certain wage threshold at this point? Like, are you like UVM medical? Being that the $20.
Yes. In our first contract, we want a $20 minimum, which has increased every time we want an increase.
Yeah.
However, at the time of this bargaining, 75% of our union was below what HUD considers an affordable wage to live in greater Berlin.
that's because it's not the livable wage.
Yes, it is not a livable wage. And so that's what was essential for us to fight for in this contract. And so we're inching over decades of stagnation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Terrific. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
And thank you, Thomas, for bringing this to us. We're now going to turn to a bill we already had introduced, 277, which is an act relating to prohibiting mandatory overtime for nurses. And we're going to begin with Sophie going through the work that she sent us, but you may not have had a chance to look at, a matrix of state-by-state comparison of laws prohibiting mandatory overtime for nurses. So, if you kind of just to quickly update us on this work, and then we're going to go to Lisa and Devin and then Helen.
So we're going to return back to the strategy.
At another point if we want to pick it up.
Okay.
So right now we're going to do 277.
Yeah, so my understanding was there were a number of questions that came up last time when I testified. So I just wanted to follow up on that. So one was the matrix showing the state by state comparison. So there are 18 other states that have prohibitions on mandatory overtime for nurses. So that has been provided to you, and I believe it's also posted on the web page. The other question was you had asked around, there was prior Vermont legislation seeking to prohibit mandatory overtime for nurses. So there was a bill H 268 in 2009. I didn't know if you wanted me to go through that. I mean, it was introduced in 2009, got referred to House Appropriations in 2010, and then evidently didn't
It
move
didn't make
forward.
it through.
And I could run through if there were.
Yeah, I think if we take it up, if we go further, we could do that. But we have 18, so thank you for doing this work. 18 other states do prohibit mandatory overtime.
Yeah, the other question was around other hospitals that have collective bargaining.
Right, and that was other key, is what do the other hospitals in Vermont?
Right, so Vermont, I have seen the contract at the University of Vermont Medical Center that I can provide on that does have prohibits mandatory overtime beyond what's scheduled. They don't define what an emergency is. If you remember in the proposed bill, there's a list of sort of the exceptions to the mandatory overtime for sort of emergency circumstances. Based on what I could find, Copley Hospital, Brattleboro Retreat, and Porter Medical Center also have contracts that deal with limits on how much time nurses can be working. But I don't have copies of those contracts.
And what was the third one? Copley, Brattleboro Retreat, and
Porter Medical Center. The other question was around the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. And again, I can send a link to that, but what they require for medical residents. And again, it's kind of interesting because it goes a little bit back to the firefighters. So it's clinical and educational work hours must be limited to no more than 80 hours per week, averaged over a 4-week period, including all in-house clinical and educational activities, clinical work done from home, and all moonlighting. A resident should have 8 hours off between scheduled clinical work and education periods. Residents must have at least 14 hours of brief clinical work and education after 24 hours of in-house call. And residents must be scheduled for a minimum of 1 day in 7 free of clinical work and required education, again, averaged over 4 weeks. So you could have a very intense couple of weeks and then more time off, and that they can't be called at home when they're having that time off. I can certainly provide the link to that, but that's available. And then physicians, there's no federal regulation that provides the work hours of physicians, and there are no, as far as I know, there are no states that legally cap the number of hours that a fully licensed practicing physician can work in a week. Typically, their work is determined by whatever their employment contract is.
so only residents have any kind of.
Right, and that's set by those standards are set by the accrediting agency for graduate medical education.
Right. Thank you, Sophie. I so appreciate it. We have 3 people who are interested in speaking and who we've asked to come and speak to this bill. So let's begin with Lisa Gerlich, and welcome, Lisa. I think it's your first time here.
Yes, this, yeah, so thank you for having me. I'm Lisa Gerlich. I serve as the lead political organizer for AFT Vermont. We're the state's largest healthcare and higher education union, representing about 12,000 workers. So you've heard about some of our higher ed things that we're working on. Healthcare, we have healthcare workers at UVM Medical Center, Porter Hospital, Central Vermont Medical Center, and Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. So we're really spread throughout the state. We represent nurses and techs, support staff, other medical professionals. I know this is specifically focused on nurses though. And as you know, one of the major functions of a labor union is negotiating contracts with employers that help improve working conditions for union members, which includes health and safety. Mandatory overtime is no exception to this. When nurses and other healthcare professionals are forced to work mandatory overtime, it's dangerous not only for the workers, but for patients that they're caring for. And as Sophie mentioned, because we recognize that mandatory overtime and shifts that are 12, 14, 16 plus hours are dangerous, that's been negotiated into, from the research I did, all of the contracts that our nursing unions have. And because these contracts it's not a one-sided agreement, it's a 2-sided agreement with the hospital, I don't think it's stretched to say that not only have our workers recognized that this is important and important protection for both workers and patients. But I would say that it's not a stretch to say that the hospital administrations also believe this because it's in the contract that they've all agreed to. So we have Porter, there's language that says there shall be no mandatory overtime except for when Porter Medical Center determines that there's an emergency situation where the safety of the patient requires its use and there's no reasonable alternative. UVM Medical Center and Central Vermont Medical Center, in those contracts, there's language that says that there shall be no mandatory overtime except in an emergency. And similar for the Brattleboro Federation of Nurses, there shall be no mandatory overtime except in an acute, unanticipated, and emergent change in staffing volume and or acuity. So as mentioned, it's been worked into several of our contracts. The amount of hours that means that counts as mandatory overtime differs between the contracts. So I think that our workers have enjoyed and benefited from these protections that they've won at the bargaining table, but strengthening these protections by having them be consistent across the board and codifying them in state statute would ensure that nurses and patients around the state, regardless of whether or not they're affiliated with the union, would benefit from them as well. So as I'm sure you're aware, there are a lot of dangers of mandatory overtime of extended hours. The effects have been well studied. There's several academic studies that have looked into this. But to be quick with it, working shifts longer than 12 hours without adequate time off in between make it far more likely for nurses to burn out and leave their jobs. And we already have a nurse shortage in the state, so we don't need to make that worse. It's also strongly linked to a reduction in quality of care and is specifically linked to patient mortality and hospital-acquired conditions, including pressure ulcers, falls, central line associated bloodstream infections, and catheter associated urinary tract infections. And that's directly from an academic study that I can share with you all. So like I said, it's harmful not just to the workers, but to the patients as well. And I just would ask you to think of any loved one that you have being cared for by somebody who is fatigued. It could be a very dangerous situation that I wouldn't want to see anybody in my life go through. And also, as Sophie mentioned, there are 18 other states who have this in state law, either a ban or a severe limit on mandatory overtime, including our neighbors in New Hampshire and in New York. It's true that we have a nursing shortage in the state, but mandatory overtime is not the answer. It puts patients in danger. It puts workers in danger. And these practices may help in the short term, but in the long term, it leads to burnout. It leads to people leaving their jobs, and it will just exacerbate problems. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any data as to how many accidents or really challenging situations have happened as a result of nurses working in overtime? Do we have data on that? Maybe Devin has it. I don't know. I think we would want to see the data on what actually is happening in Vermont in terms of the accidents or the fatalities or whatever has happened during a documented overtime period.
Yeah, and I don't have that data specifically in front of me. And like I mentioned, that in the hospitals that we represent, there's already a ban of some sort or a limitation of some sort. But I can look into that.
Great, that would be great. Lisa, thank you. David has a question.
Just a quick one, so to kind of piggyback on what you just asked.
Because we must work on the same committee.
How prevalent is mandatory? We have any data on that?
I
solve the problem.
Right, and I don't have that because, as I mentioned, I know the hospitals that we represent as well already have that ban in place. I think Porter, it's 16 hours though, which is a bit long, and I know I've heard that from some folks that 16 hours is most of the day. So I don't have that data, and I think that this would more than solve the issue for at least the hospitals that we represent. I unfortunately don't have the data on other hospitals. It would just help make it equal across the board. So that way, regardless of if those workers are in our union, in a different union, or not unionized at all, that those are just across the board the same for everyone.
Great. I'm going to just give Keisha, you have a quick question.
Not.
Well, I just want Devin. I just want to have Devin and Helen Rain. But if you did, go for it.
Well, actually, I just felt like while Lisa's here,
you had said something about the goose and the gander with the state colleges, and I wondered if she could, I feel badly that UVM represented the issue, and I think maybe you could just speak to, you know, this is also something important to the state colleges.
Yeah,
And there's 7 unions at the state college.
yeah.
Well, this was about the right.
Well, one thing.
No, I'm just curious. I mean, it would be good to have somebody from the state college,
Yeah.
obviously, if we take it up.
I do have somebody from the state colleges who is interested in giving testimony.
Great.
I know that,
Let us know, that'd be great.
yeah, exactly. I know he'll be here on the 26th of this month already, so I can speak with you later
Great.
about. See if we
We
can
will check. We'll probably have to move on some of this before then.
Great.
Great. Devin, thank you, Lisa.
Morning.
Good morning, Devin. It's the first time.
I know,
You're here.
Say, yeah, Devin Green, Vermont Association of Hospitals and Health Systems.
Do you know all of us?
I do.
Okay, great.
Good to see you again. And I'll just start off by saying, I met with our chief nursing officers on Monday. They were similarly sort of questioning, where's this coming from? Where's the data? We haven't been hearing this as a concern. 9 of our 15 hospitals are unionized. And so we just have questions around this and the need for it, and would love to see more data. One thing I would like to stress is that while long hours may attribute to patient outcomes, the use of traveling nurses also has a bad impact on patient outcomes. So really, the solution is investing more in our workforce development and increasing our workforce. But some of the questions I have, you know, as you saw the legislation here, it had all different sorts of periods. Some of it is just based off of your contract. Some of it is based off of 16 hours. We don't know if the timing is right. The medical residents, as was testified to, are 80 hours a week over a 4-week period. That's much different than what we're talking about here. And then the language in here around collective bargaining agreements, the way I read it, I just want to, if this bill moves forward, I want to ensure that the agreements supersede the law, because we think it's really important that those agreements be honored. It looks like the law wouldn't, like, this is something that's negotiated with. I prefer that hospitals and unions, you know, if those bargaining agreements are negotiated, is there a way to have them supersede the law in this case?
I think usually we set a floor in labor law, and they can depart
down.
upward,
Like,
well,
go
down, up, I don't know, like up and.
I think,
So Sophie can also answer that
Yeah.
whether you
Yeah.
take this further, but
I think really what we're advocating for is, you know, allowing, we haven't heard that this is a problem. We would love to allow for this to be worked out through contract to create greater flexibility. Because one of the things that I saw in the exemptions piece that I immediately thought of was, you know, there are exemptions there for national disaster or state or national disasters or emergencies that are unforeseen. But what that did was put me right back to COVID. And I think that there are times when those exemptions would not apply. For instance, if you look at 2020, 2021, you have the start of the state of emergency over here in March.
What's the left side scale?
That is, yeah, 0 to 100. This is hospitalizations.
Well,
Hospitalizations in Vermont over this time. So you can see in March, it starts out pretty large. It gets really low because we did all of you did a fantastic job implementing our policies. You kept people out of the hospital. We saw it increase again after October and into the holidays of 2020. And then the state of emergency ended in June or July of 2021. And that's when we actually hit the crisis stage with Omicron coming in. And so our hospitals were just killed in all of those.
hammered maybe.
Hammered. Pilled is not a great, yeah, we don't want to associate that with hospitals, but we were hammered in all of this. And it was entirely foreseeable, you know, day in and day out, we knew that we were gonna be hammered and that there were too many patients in the hospital. There was not a state of emergency in place. And there was, you know, none of the exemptions that are in this law would have applied to this scenario. So I just want to caution us, and, you know, we are going through a pivotal moment in healthcare right now. I think it's really important. I know our hospitals all value our workforce and are willing to work with them, and I would like to ensure that we have the flexibility to continue moving forward in that space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I look like I'm squinting. I forgot my glasses.
No.
I'm trying to not put my
I
sunglasses.
know that struggle.
But you said you hadn't heard about this issue. Did you ask? Did you
Yeah,
solicit
I asked the chief nursing
information?
officers what
Okay.
they had been hearing, and they
Uh-huh.
were unsure where this came from.
Okay, I mean, because you know, we've debated this issue since I got here in 2009 and
Right.
probably before that.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people were feeling like these are in a lot of contracts, that it's been managed.
But it's not in all the contracts. So can you share more about, you wanted it to, what does it look like now in contracts that you want to protect?
I think it looks like what's negotiated for between labor and management in the contracts, they've come to an agreement with it. And I don't have the details of the contracts, but again, I haven't heard from our chief nursing officers that there's been, they were questioning what is driving this, what is the need? We feel like we have addressed a lot of this already
How did you address it?
through contracts.
For contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna,
Then I guess what would be the concern? If you feel like you've. What is
Because this
yeah.
could, you know, Porter has 16 hours, and so this
Okay.
would eliminate Porter's contract potentially, unless there's legislation in there that supersedes Porter's contract, then maybe that causes a problem. I think there's a reason that Porter went to 16 hours.
so I'm gonna, when we take this up, we're going to, if we take it up, we'll discuss further. I'm just curious you say you represent 9 of the 15 hospitals.
I represent all of the
That's
hospitals.
what I thought.
Yes, yeah, all of our
9
hospitals,
15 have union contracts.
9 of the
So
15 are
6
unionized.
function without unions.
That's my understanding, but I would want to go back and check. That was like a quick
Right.
survey.
Thank you, Devin, so much. We're gonna turn to Helen on the screen. Helen, is Helen here? Oh, Helen's here.
You just don't expect me to be here talking about long-term care facilities.
It's so good.
Surprise, I represent long-term care now.
I know, you know, your work
We
trajectory.
need help with agricultural matters.
We think of her with agriculture.
I think of me with agriculture. Sorry, apologies, any of my members are watching.
Helen, it is so good to have you. Welcome, introduce yourself and your hat on. And we have a few minutes we'll take. Tucker, we're gonna just be about 5 more minutes. So if you'd be kind enough to address us, that would be great.
Yes, I can go quickly. So I'm Helen Laban. I'm Executive Director of the Vermont Healthcare Association. We represent assisted living residences, residential care homes, and nursing homes in the state. So we have a deep workforce shortage as well. And if you were House Human Services, you would hear a lot about that. The good news for this bill is that means I have a lot of research on nursing workforce and I can do quick turnaround testimony. So one important thing to know about the long-term care setting and nursing workforce is that I won't say the number one, but close to the number one reason why nurses say that they seek out that particular sector is the flexibility of the scheduling. And so we talk a lot about scheduling, more than I really wanted to hear about scheduling. And one element of it in this residential context is that unlike, say, a hospital, you have very distinct time periods with different activity levels, because this is primarily a home for folks. And even in the residential care setting, for example, in the state regulations, there's a sleeping shift that's written in. You have to have one person awake, another person sleeping, but available if woken up. So there's really a lot of difference between what shift you're taking. And the most popular structure is 2 aides on, 1 aide off for 3 days. And so we know that folks are staffing differently in this residential context, that flexibility is highly prioritized, and that the common forms of providing this coverage does come in units that are outside of the parameters of this particular bill. I mean, it'd be kind of creepy just to show up to sleep. Like maybe some people are doing that, but I don't think that's a standard way to structure those kinds of shifts. So we're concerned about that. We're concerned about the impact on our primary element of being attractive to nursing staff. And then additionally, there's some language in here that just doesn't necessarily match what you would be talking about in a residential long-term care setting. So, the staying on during a medical or surgical activity, those are by and large definitely not surgical. And to some extent, not even medical, the activities that many nurses are performing. Like, no, you don't want someone to walk away in the middle of a surgery, nor do you want them to walk away in the middle of assisting with bathing. But that would not be considered a medical or surgical activity. And then then the last bit being, and Devin also mentioned that question of the narrowness of the definition of an unforeseen disaster or catastrophic event. Potentially uniquely in nursing home and long-term care sector, but maybe not uniquely so. With our workforce shortage, we have maxed out agency staffing capacity just to cover the shifts that are required. We have minimum staffing ratios. We have staffing ratios based on individual resident assessment. That's 24/7. We've maxed out capacity for agency staffing to flex to cover that minimum without the disruption of a snowstorm or flu outbreak among staff. And so we do see times when you need to bring in staff to cover that you don't have that agency offloading option. Mandatory overtime, as I understand, is not common among nursing homes. I think a couple use it, so it's not a broad issue in that sense, but in the sense of this disrupting standard scheduling and contracting structures that are in place without anything super vital to replace them, that's where they're the concern with this bill.
Any questions for Ellen? Ellen, it's great to have you in this new capacity.
Anytime you want to hear about long-term care workforce, I got many a presentation.
Well, and one with the age of the legislature, I'm sure many of us will be very interested in.
Oh, yes, you have some capacity to expand.
We do indeed. Thank you all. We are now going to really take a big shift to cannabis. So if anybody wants to stay for cannabis, we're going to do 45 minutes on cannabis, and then we are going to take a break and we're going to return to cannabis. So thank you all. JP, thank you. Great. Tucker, would you like to join us? So, as Tucker joins us, Tucker has, we've been working because of a big bill, and we've been working to hone it a bit. And we have agreed, the House is taking out, the Senate is taking out cannabis, and the House is doing liquor and lottery. So we'll be getting their bill on devices, and we are doing this bill and beginning it now. And it's a big bill, so we need to make some time for it. And it's a big bill to walk through. So we're going to begin with Tucker and really try and understand what is being asked of in this bill. Thanks in case you're bringing it to us.
This is the first time we've seen this.
Yes. And it is, we've got a draft. And it is draft 1.1, I believe, of S-278. Is that correct? Yeah.
That is correct. Good morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. I hope that you have in front of you.
Does it feel fair to say that? Yes. That it's draft 1.1 of an already introduced bill because you have had input on.
Because we have been working to hone it. I thought I'd said that.
Okay.
I did say that. We've been working to hone it, and because it was a very big bill and our time is sadly.
But for people who are struggling to follow along, I don't think anything that was in the bill as introduced was removed entirely as a subject matter. Would you say that?
As a subject matter, that is true.
Okay.
Okay. But but it has been,
It's been modified.
it's been modified, right? But the draft 1.1 is up on the website, so people can follow on.
Great.
Our process is not that clear, so I'm
Right.
trying to save myself and
No, no,
a conversation thing.
So today we are addressing this draft. Tucker, welcome.
I will reset. Good morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. You should have in front of you draft 1.1 of a committee amendment to S 278. And as you just heard, this contains all of the subject matter the underlying bill is introduced. There have been some sections that have been condensed, particularly the permitting sections. There have been some scrivener's errors that have been corrected. And additionally, there's been some clarification throughout, in particular, aligning certain limitations, THC limitations as an example, with other surrounding states. I'm certain your high quality test about that from another party. We will start in section 1. I provided reader assistance headings throughout the proposed committee amendments, so that you know
Thank
the
you, very
subjects that
helpful.
will be covered section. So the first couple sections deal with THC content and packaging limits. So
Okay,
this-
how do we pronounce that word? The full word we're talking, you usually talk about it as THC. How do we pronounce it?
I will not be tricked into making that pronunciation attempt again. But I appreciate that the committee wants to hear me fumble and stumble.
No, we don't ever, is
Tetrahydrocannabinol? Isn't that hard?
that right?
Cannabinol. Thank you. You were practicing. Okay, so let's then let's call it THC from now on.
Yeah, I'm just.
Cannabinol.
Having a little
I said
fun here.
cannabinol. You said
Okay.
cannabinol.
Sure.
There we go.
I
Okay.
will blame any mispronunciation on the fact that about 20% of my waking hours I am listening to or speaking in Danish instead of English.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say Peppa Pig or something.
Yeah.
Saying they should.
I
Well,
thought you were gonna say.
Peppa Pig,
Three-year-old,
pronouncing that word, there might be other reasons. Okay, section 1. This amends 7 VSA section 868 relating to prohibited products. You will notice that in subsection B, uniformly throughout, the THC limit for liquid concentrated cannabis products is raised from 60% to 70%. There are some conforming amendments in here as well, eliminating references to integrated licensees, which I will cover later. There's a whole set of sections cleaning up Title 7 and eliminating that particular license category.
And this aligns us with,
Raising to 70% aligns with a few other New England states, and I know that the CCD has put a lot of effort into providing charts or preparing charts for the committee that will show through other
Yeah.
states. So I won't tread on the wonderful work of our partners in state government. Moving on to page 2 in section 2. Subsection A, a cannabis establishment licensed under this chapter shall not dispense or sell, in the new language is in subsection B, cannabis products with greater than 60% THC to a person under 25. So paired with the preceding section, the overall cap on THC content is being raised for those cannabis products from 60% to 70%. And that gap in the 60 to 70% range, there is now age requirement of 25 to purchase those products that are in that range. So the 21 age stayed for 60% or under, 25 for 60s.
I realize now we're jumping into the very technical, which Tucker is very good at. As people have questions, as the original author of the bill, and we have the CCB here. But I'm really grateful that Tucker is the person who's drafting this. No knock to anyone who drafts for judiciary, but this is about a reciprocal market as well with the rest of New England, which makes things a lot easier for everyone in our state. And so I just want to be clear that these things, if they look like aren't based in any context for the most part, we are borrowing from pretty sound policy in places like Massachusetts or New York or.
Policy and experience. And I would say, as we align, as we have spent some time in this committee discussing what will happen if the feds act in the next few months, how do we not only better align ourselves with New England, but how do we also look thoughtfully and try and prepare ourselves for what may happen nationally? And so I'm hoping that if we have time, Pepper will update us on his conversations. Pepper, are you hearing me?
I am.
Yeah, Chris, with updating us on those discussions as well. So a lot of this is trying to bring us in alignment either regionally or at some point maybe federal.
And for the preceding two sections, something that you might hear coming in this area is that there is some leeway with these percentages. So I'd recommend hearing what the kind of margin of error in that percentage is. If we're ready, we'll talk about section 3, which amends 7 VSA section 881. This section deals with the rulemaking authority of the Cannabis Control Board. And within this section, in subdivision A3A, there is provision that raises the THC milligram limit for the single package of cannabis products. So if you're with me in that subdivision 3A, CCB is authorized to adopt rules, including requirements that a single package of a cannabis product shall not contain more than 200 milligrams of THC.
There's no limitation about it. Like now, it's 100 milligrams of THC. They just buy 2 boxes or 2 whatever packages. There's no limitation.
So this is the package limitation. So
There are lots of limitations. It depends. There's a point of sale limitation.
We'll get to.
there's concentration, there's packaging, and then there's transaction, which we'll get into. And then over all of that, there's also possession, where there's civil penalties that increase depending on how much an individual possesses.
Right.
So we're in the transaction. Thank you very much for the setup, segue. All right, in section 4, in 7 VSA section 907, in a single transaction, your retailer may provide 2 ounces of cannabis. I'm going to flag this phrase for you because there has been a request for some clarification of this phrase or the equivalent in cannabis products. Now, this draft 1.1 does not propose what the statutory equivalent would be. The reason that I have not added this in here is that the committee needs to make a policy about what that equivalent in cannabis products would be, and likely hear about the quasi-scientific way they come to understanding what the equivalent of this products would be, so, and what other states have done.
Right. So, Pepper, we're going to turn to you on that.
Okay, so 2 ounces in a single transaction or the equivalent of these products. There are conforming amendments in the next couple sections. Section 5 amends 18 VSA section 4230 to increase the possession limits in subdivision A1 to no person shall knowingly and unlawfully possess more than 2 ounces of cannabis. That's because the transaction limit has increased, or more than 10 grams of hashish. So both of the possession limits for cannabis shall increase. Subdivision 2A, no person shall knowingly and unlawfully possess more than 2 ounces of cannabis or 10 grams of hashish. Similar conforming amendments are made to VSA section 4230A, section 6. That's on page. These possession limits are increasing again because of the transaction.
Yes, sorry.
I asked Tucker to testify to this, but I hope that the Jim Pepper will speak to how that compares to the neighboring states.
Yeah, that's sort of a chief objective here is to align ourselves. So that's, I think, what we've.
Now we get to the very exciting portion of the bill on page 5, section 7. We're going to get into the permits and specifically pilot programs for two new permits that the CCB was authorized to issue. The first is an event permit.
Which will look familiar to this committee.
Yes. All of this is proposed as new language. So in section 7, the new section 912 is added to title 7. First, subsection A, the board is authorized to grant event permits to licensed cannabis establishments in good standing. To bring us back, cannabis establishment as defined covers all of the various licensees under title 7. So not just your stores. The holder of an event permit is authorized to oversee and administer a commercial event under procedures that are adopted by. Notwithstanding section 833, persons 21 years of age or older may consume cannabis or cannabis products at an event authorized pursuant to this section. So 833 covers consumption of public use. So you can imagine that has to be not withstood in order for events to be held in an area that would otherwise be prohibited by the laws.
And this, I mean, this doesn't have a lot of parameters around it, but at the statutory level, I don't think either does alcohol event permitting, and DLL has a lot of authority and rulemaking. And
DLL does have, some flexible rulemaking authority around their various events permits, but I would say that the alcoholic beverage events permits are broken out into
Yeah.
screening categories.
Just remember, we started with art galleries.
Sampling events, limited
I
events,
guess-
special venue serving permits.
maybe that's a good opportunity to say, I hope we don't do the same thing with a different industry, because this is us having to go back every year and say, this is what is a lot of farmers markets, et cetera, and we have not had the kinds of problems that necessitate, I think, such statutory review
Right.
every single year.
And some of the complication that is also involved, and I flagged this early on in the alcoholic beverage statutes, is that the state has chosen to adopt a 3-tier model. So there are different permits and licenses that are issued to various actors within the 3 tiers. It's also broken out by the amount that gets served to an individual at the event, and who is participating. So there was, just a couple sessions ago, a split between festival permits, which are really for manufacturers to provide their products to people who want to sample them, or brewers just there for this day. And then otherwise unlicensed entities that are holding a festival would get what's known as a limited event. And that would be like the Banjo Festival wanting to be able to have a beer. So that's how granular the event permitting has gotten.
So this would give CCB authority
Broad
to
authority. Yes.
create rules around event permits.
And you can add policy choices to this as you wish. This starts with the framework that the committee has worked on in the past, which is again fairly broad. It doesn't tie it to specific locations, it doesn't tie it to specific licensees. It grants discretion to the CCB to choose up to 10 permits annually to be issued here. 10 is a placeholder number that we'll get to later if the committee can raise or adjust. All right, so under subsection B, we get into eligibility for the licensed applicants. So the cannabis establishment is eligible to apply for an event permit, provided that the establishment submits a fee and an application demonstrating to the board's satisfaction for subdivision 1. The establishment has received written approval from the local cannabis control commission, or if there is no local cannabis control commission, this one. In addition, the local control commission or the select board can put conditions on the issuance of the event permit, which could include limitations appropriate to protect the public, manage traffic, or abate nuisances. Second, security plan to ensure that intoxicated persons or persons under 21 cannot access the space that is subject, and that the premises are secured from diversion or inversion and lawfully may be used for the purpose intended.
May I just flag, I guess I have a question with what the CCB in their rulemaking authority can do, because we don't refer, with alcohol, we, in those event permits, we limit the consumption ability so that somebody, because we know a person becomes intoxicated over a certain amount of alcohol that they have drunk at these events. We don't have a consumption. Is that, is that envisioned here that the CCB would also have a consumption limit? Possibly.
That
For
would be a-
discussion.
That would be a policy choice.
For
we need to
discussion,
make.
okay.
Remember that
It's hard in the evolving market right now. We might have to come back to us.
Yeah,
you know,
well, we're
but
gonna have okay, just,
keep in mind, we did like.
Yeah.
How many ounces of spirits can you taste at a farmer's market? Like,
Right.
we can always
right.
return to this if we
Right.
want.
No, I know.
So you have on
But I
premises.
just want to just on this note of witnesses, we are having a hearing next week on this subject joint with the House because they will be taking this bill after us. And we are collecting witnesses. Keisha's provided some, we've done, some CCB has. We have a robust witness list. We're going to devote an hour and a half to that next Wednesday morning, first thing. So just a heads up that think in your brain as we go through this, who would be the best witness, not endless.
Sorry.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I dropped the barbell. They're kind of weaponry.
I was gonna say, it's huge. I don't want to bump into Keisha in the dark. Okay, but I just want to remind us that give us a heads up that we're doing that.
I'm very excited for.
I know.
Talking about some of the consumption limits that exist in the alcoholic beverages space, there are for these specific types of permits, depending on where it's being held, what the permit is. There are limitations on what can be consumed at that particular event, but recall that that doesn't extend out to all of the licenses that are available. So first and third class licenses, it's all based on licensee education, which is another thing that the committee could look at in this context. There's also no overarching possession limit for alcoholic beverages state, but there is here within the cannabis statutes limitations on individual transactions, on content, and on possession. So slightly different from the state you'll be working
Right.
in make these policy choices. All right, subdivision 3 is another component that has to be submitted with the application for the permit. A product sale plan that describes the quantities and types of cannabis and cannabis products that will be offered for sale, and how the cannabis will be transported, monitored, secured, displayed, and sold in conformity with state law and board rules. Fourth, capacity to administer and enforce the required plans and confirmation that the applicant has secured services from county law enforcement agency or private security provider licensed under Title 26. Fifth, proof of commercially reasonable insurance for the proposed event. And finally, subdivision 6, compliance with any other health and safety requirements that the board may prescribe for the particular event or location. And then we have an including but not limited to, including limits on attendees or types of products that may be consumed on the event site. So the board has some discretion with this subdivision to add some additional restrictions. Okay. Sub C, restrictions. So the board shall not issue more than 10 event permits a year. Recall that these sections are set up as a 2-year pilot. An event permit shall be valid for a single event not to exceed 24 hours at a single access controlled location. Permit shall not be issued for a location at which alcoholic beverages are sold or furnished for on-premises consumption. So a first or third class liquor licensee could not pull an event permit from the CCB for their bar or restaurant space. The holder of an event permit shall sell only registered adult use cannabis products at an event. One thing to flag about the way that sentence about the restrictions related to alcoholic beverages is that it's at a location at which alcoholic beverages are sold or furnished for off-premises consumption. That could include farmers markets, and it's something that you may want to clarify if the intent was to have this event permit also extend to those spaces. There might need to be some tweaking in that sentence to clarify that if there's a fourth class alcoholic beverage licensee selling samples of their distilled spirits at the farmer's market, it would qualify the entire event expense. We're on page 7, subsection D, penalties for noncompliance. Deviation from the security and sales plans, product tracking, taxation requirements, or permit terms shall be a violation that's subject to adverse licensing action. Subsection E, cannabis establishments shall be assessed a fee of $1,000 to apply for an event permit, of which 50% will be distributed to the host municipality and 50% to the Cannabis Regulation Fund. Sub F, procedures. Is the committee familiar with the difference between procedures and rules under the Administrative Procedures Statute?
Perhaps you'd like to clarify.
So rules on all ears.
It comes up quite a bit in the realm of devices, specifically lottery. So procedures do not go through the formal rulemaking process. They are typically adopted for internal regulation of a public agency. They do not require by default public hearings, and they do not typically have the force of law. But in the context of lottery, sports wagering, and a few other limited examples, the General Assembly has allowed state agencies to adopt procedures that do have the force of law. And you have sometimes required that they follow some public hearing procedures for adopting those procedures that have the force of law. What you see in subsection F is very similar to what the state has established for the lottery and sports room. So the board shall adopt procedures pursuant to 3 VSA section 835 to govern the event permits issued pursuant to this section, including the application procedures, event site restrictions, security requirements, associated forms, and the permittee selection process. So really those last two components would be typical for procedures. Some of the others on that list would be typical for rules, but here you're giving them public. Sure.
Yeah, no.
Before you go much further, can we just go back to E really quick? Do you know of any other comparable where the E amount would be somewhat scaled or relative to the size of the event? I'm just wondering, are all events really equal, or are there some that we would anticipate or contemplate that would be massive? The review process would involve a lot more than, say, a small farmer market on a Saturday morning.
It's a great question.
Yeah,
And
I
I
think
know
that's-
that particularly for sports wagering, we've had a lot of questions about matching the fees to
Right.
regulatory burden. It's a good question to ask the CCB,
Yeah.
you know, what they're envisioning for this process. Some of the event permits in the alcoholic beverages space are $70. You know, so the burden on DLL to monitor and enforce at the farmer's market location might be different for from some of the sampling events where
So we resort to a huge thing, drilling people all over the region.
or the festivals on the waterfront where you might have, you know, 60 different vendors and DLL agents that are doing check-ins.
Or the new Burlington entertainment venue and conventions.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Thank
So
you.
subdivision 1, for each procedure proposed to be adopted, the board shall publish the proposed procedure on their website or not fewer than 2 public hearings at which the public can seek additional information or seek comments. Subdivision 2, the board shall not be required to initiate rulemaking. Procedure that is adopted pursuant to this section shall not be enforced in law and be binding on all persons who apply for the event permit. Okay. So the event permit there covers a broad range of potential events.
Much broader than we, just to remind ourselves, much broader than what we were looking at last year. And where we were really just looking at piloting a sort of farmer's market style event for cannabis.
All of the requirements of this section are the same as what was proposed last year, but
Right, but I feel like we were really just focused on that pilot. Right.
so one of the things that I flagged for you is that the placeholder cap on the number of permits that would be issued to this is 10. So that is 10 24-hour events that could be issued to total.
But not
And
20 12-hour events.
And that could be different cannabis establishments that acquire those permits. It's not for a series of events. So those are all considerations for the committee. If you have different policy choices to make about the number of permits that can be issued, whether it's a limit on the number of permits that can be issued to an individual licensee. Otherwise, it's going to be up to the discretion of the CCP when they adopt the procedures.
Right. So rulemaking, that entire section we just heard, CCB would do rulemaking on.
They would adopt procedures to implement the program during the 2-year period, and you will get to rulemaking in just a bit.
Okay, well, we didn't deal with rulemaking in B,
Those were the procedures.
oh, I
We will
thought,
get to the APA rules after we cover section 913.
got it.
All right. Section 913 contains,
We're on page,
we're on page 8.
page 8.
Section 8, page 8, right at the top.
How well.
All right. Delivery permits. The board is authorized to grant delivery permits to cannabis establishments. Again, broad, includes any of the licensees under that definition.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just yet another example of something that just might explode depending what the feds decide to do.
Right, and so, I mean,
The interstates,
so I'll say a couple things because so it's giving me a look.
oh dear.
You know, I expect this to be a longer term conversation. I yield to the chair about how much time we have this session to discuss how delivery could or would unfold, and I think there are questions of what we have control over to some extent. I think Massachusetts has had a sort of rocky experience with delivery that we should learn from.
Yeah.
I think this is an area that I hope people will also think flexibly about when it comes to the current atmosphere with alcohol. There is a lot of power concentrated among the wholesalers and distributors. And distributors, there are now 2 left in the state, I think, for alcohol. So not only do we hear about that being, you know, a very constrained access and service and et cetera, even though I'm not saying they do a poor job, but if they decide they're no longer carrying a particular spirit or a bottle of wine, we hear about that. You know, this is it's always an ongoing conversation that we have in alcohol too, about who can deliver or how we can get products directly to consumer. So I don't want us to close off our minds to how to improve what delivery and direct to consumer looks like
Exactly.
now and in future conversations.
And I believe, am I wrong in believing that with medical cannabis, we have a delivery option?
I understand that there is a delivery option for particular people.
So we do have a delivery option for stuff using this. David,
So just to be clear, this is not about section doesn't deal with wholesale. This is about retail to
Just-
consumer.
yes,
Okay.
Right,
because
and-
wholesale, they're already delivering to the retail.
And that, you know, it would probably be a stackable permit for a already very regulated entity that has, you know, other permits like a retail permit.
Okay, let's,
As we move through this, one of the things that I'll note is that the structure of this permit is based off of the existing retail delivery permit for alcoholic beverages, which is exclusive to second-class licensees. I can send that statute to me if you would like to take a look at it. In subsection D, permit terms and restrictions. Limitation in the first sentence, 10 of these permits may be issued annually by the The holder of the permit may deliver cannabis and cannabis products sold from the licensed premises for consumption off the premises to an individual who is 21 years age or older, provided.
Just going back
David.
to your point, medical cannabis, there is a delivery mechanism. So
I believe so.
Okay.
Pepper, are we wrong?
James Pepper, for the record, no, there's delivery happening right now in Vermont, from medical dispensaries to medical patients.
I think I think at least some medical representatives might like to come in and talk to how that could be improved also, frankly. And this bill doesn't address medical currently, but as you know, I think there is a desire to make sure that that moves in as humane and efficient and expansive a way as possible as well. So I'd be happy to talk more about that form of delivery.
Right. We have a robust witness list, so I'm gonna add medical to our,
I think maybe some people that I've sent would be prepared to speak.
yeah, okay, great. Thank you, Tucker.
We're gonna move into the 5 provisos here that outline the limitations. So first, delivery shall only be made by the permit holder or an employee or agent of the permit holder. So this would not be third-party delivery services. Deliveries shall only occur between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. They shall only be made to a physical address located in Vermont. An employee or agent of a delivery permit holder shall not be permitted to make deliveries unless the employee has completed a training program that is approved by the CCB. In context of alcoholic beverages, that's training to identify if the person receiving the delivery is already on the scene. It's the right age, identity verification, things like that.
And they also have to have a license to drive those big trucks. There are a couple licenses for them.
Although in this case, the retail delivery permits, it's more like a minivan.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little lighter. It's a little lighter.
It's, in fact, I think that this entire permitting structure, when it was initially conceived for alcoholic beverages, was for gift baskets, seasonal gift baskets that the retailers would put together and deliver.
Let's please leave off over 20 years of nibbling away at prohibition.
Well, more than that.
Well, right, 100 years, but then like, we finally decided to do something about it and we're still doing it.
But we've been involved in it last time. Okay.
It cannot be for resale. So the products that are delivered are not intended for resale. They're intended for personal use. We're on to page 9 in subsection C. The annual fee is $100.
And we're $100 and we're not doing more than 10 a year. Is that right?
That is right.
And 10. So here's a question I have, I guess, and we can get it from Pepper, which is 10 a year, and then that keeps growing. So it's not just 10 a year, but it could be 10 more the next year. So it could be 20, it could grow.
During the pilot, based on how this is structured, it would be 10 in a given year for the 2 years. Period. 10 per year.
Okay. Period. Okay. Thomas.
Do we have any concern about geographic concentration? You know, do we want to put in here the parameters that Chittenden County doesn't get all 10 of these?
Yeah, they're all going to run.
I will say the original bill didn't have just 10 because I trust that this could be worked out so that we're not the reason we had this fight last year is because we constrained how many participants could be in the pilot so much that everybody got concerned they wouldn't be allowed to do this. I don't think we need a limit of 10.
Okay, that's a subject for discussion. We're marking it for a subject for discussion.
I mean, Chittenden County will take all 10 if you want, but.
Yeah, no, Rutland's already vying for it.
Let's do more than
We can move through subsection D because it contains the exact same procedures language that's covered in section.
Right.
In section 9, we are getting now the rules. So on or before July 1st, 2027, so not this coming July, but the next, the board shall initiate rulemaking to adopt rules governing the permits established in section 7 and 8. That's delivery permits. Subsection B, we have a report that the General Assembly will receive after rulemaking has been initiated towards the end of the pilot program.
So we're letting the pilot run for a whole year, 2 years, and a year, and then they'll initiate rulemaking.
Yes, so halfway through the pilot, they will initiate rulemaking and deliver a report prior to the start of the legislative session. So that report is due on November 15th, 2027, and the board shall submit it to House Government Operations and Military Affairs and this committee concerning the permits established in section 7 and 8 shall include a concise assessment for benefits, challenges, and administrative liability of the permit programs. And the board may recommend best practices for security, inventory tracking, tax enforcement, permit administration, local government coordination, and optimizing market access for small cultivators. Finally, the board shall recommend updates to statutes governing event permits and delivery permits, including whether either statute should be repealed on the date set by this act. And at the end, the pilot expires on July 1st, 2028. So there is a prospective repeal of these sections built in. Once the General Assembly comes back, decides to extend the program or codify it indefinitely.
Oh, given that we're about to dive into a serious subject, I mean, not serious subject, but a fairly good size area, why don't we take our break now? Before we launch into cannabis advertising, and why don't we take our break, and we will be back at 11 to finish going through the bill. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Perfect. I'm advertising a break. And I don't see anyone
Resisting.
resisting.
I think it's a great idea.
I think I'm ready for